If you handed a brilliant, like a Nobel Prize-winning astrophysicist a state-of-the-art telescope, right?
Right. The absolute best equipment available.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They could confidently tell you the exact chemical composition of a star that's millions of light years away.
Mm-hmm.
But if you ask that same physicist to use that exact same telescope to read, I don't know, a bacteria culture in a petri dish.
They'd tell you there's absolutely nothing there.
Yeah. It's just blurry glass.
Because it's the wrong tool for the job. I mean, the tool you choose fundamentally dictates the reality you're actually capable of perceiving.
Right. You can have a world-class mind, but if your methodology is just completely mismatched to your subject, your conclusions are going to be fundamentally flawed. And that tension between having a brilliant analytical mind, but using the wrong analytical tools, that is exactly where we find ourselves today.
It really is.
So welcome back to the Deep Dive, and we are stepping into a truly fascinating academic showdown based on some incredible source material you shared with us.
Yeah, we're looking at a comprehensive academic essay. It's authored by a collective of scholars identified in our sources as Frank Leo, Moshe Levi, and Fred Kiskos Moises Lutakes.
Actually, there is only one author. All the names mentioned are the author's names in different languages.
And this essay is a direct rebuttal to a series of books written by Professor Li Ming.
Which is where that telescope metaphor comes in, right? Because Professor Li is a retired, highly respected physics professor from Taiwan's National Tsinghua University.
That's right. He's a top-tier scientist.
Yeah, and he wrote critiques of Christianity with titles like I Look at Christianity, a reflection of an intellectual and Exodus, history or myth. So you have a physicist turning his analytical gaze toward ancient history.
But the essay authors argue that while Professor Li is obviously an elite scientist, his approach to ancient text relies on the tools of modern logic and, well, modern linguistic translations.
Right.
He completely bypasses the specialized tools required for ancient texts, things like biblical linguistics, Near Eastern archaeology, ancient philology.
Now, before we jump into the deep end here, I want to be super clear with you, our listener, about our mission today. We are not here to endorse any specific theological viewpoints.
No, not at all.
We're not playing referee in the religious debate between these scholars and Professor Lai. Our goal is just to impartially explore the mechanics of how we analyze ancient texts. We want to extract those aha moments about linguistics, archaeology, and history that completely change how we view the past.
And there are a lot of those moments in this essay.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the fatal mistake of translation.
Yeah, so the essay authors highlight a massive problem right out of the gate, which is what happens when you read an ancient text through a modern cultural lens?
It usually doesn't go well.
No, it doesn't. The core conflict here centers around a specific moment in the Gospel of John in chapters 2 and 19. Jesus addresses his mother, Mary, using the word woman. Now, in the modern Chinese translation that Professor Lai was reading, this is rendered as furen.
And Li argues that calling your own mother woman demonstrates disrespect, rudeness, and even a moral flaw in Jesus' character. Which, I mean, on a purely modern level, I get.
Sure.
If I walked into my mother's kitchen right now and said, "Woman, what's for dinner?" I would not survive the interaction.
You'd be in serious trouble.
Yeah, that's incredibly dismissive today.
Right. In modern Chinese or modern English, it sounds terrible. But the essay counters this by essentially putting away the modern dictionary and pulling out the tools of ancient philology.
Right.
They look at the original Koine Greek. The word used there is ginai. That is the vocative form of the word ginai.
And just to clarify for everyone listening, the vocative case is simply the grammatical form of a word you use when you were directly addressing someone.
Precisely. It's the hey you form.
Yeah.
So to understand how a first century Greek speaker would actually hear that word, the authors pull from the absolute gold standards of ancient Greek translation. First, the BDAG. It's this massive, authoritative New Testament lexicon. And it explicitly states that the vocative ginai is by no means a disrespectful form of address.
Interesting.
Then they cite the Liddell Scott Jones lexicon, the LSJ, which defines it as a term of respect and affection, translating closer to mistress or lady.
Wait, so reading ancient Greek with modern emotional baggage just feels crazy to me. It's like translating modern internet slang literally into another language 1,000 years from now.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Like, imagine a future historian reading a text message where someone says a new pair of sneakers is sick, If they translate that literally into their future medical terminology, they'll write a whole thesis about how 21st century footwear carried a deadly virus.
Exactly.
Why is it so easy for brilliant modern minds to fall into the trap of projecting their own emotional baggage onto 2,000-year-old words?
What's fascinating here is how the essay addresses that exact cognitive blind spot. They quote the linguistic scholar Eugene Nida, who wrote, "We must never make the fatal mistake of judging other languages by our own."
Wow. We just naturally assume our current emotional resonance with a word is a universal constant across time. But to prove how wrong that is, the essay points to Homer's Odyssey.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In that epic, Odysseus respectfully and lovingly addresses his incredibly loyal wife Penelope, using this exact same word, gynai. It was just the standard, culturally appropriate way to address a respected adult woman in ancient Greek society.
And the authors don't just stop at the Greek, do they? Because I saw that they dig into the Aramaic context as well.
They do, because Aramaic was the actual spoken language of the region at the time. They look at the Syriac Peshitta.
Which is an ancient translation, right?
Yes, it's an ancient Near Eastern translation of the Bible that gives us a vital window into how the Aramaic-speaking community actually understood this exchange.
Yeah.
The word used there is ataya. The essay cites scholar Chaim Ben-Torah, who explains that calling a mother Anath in that specific ancient culture was a tender sign of respect.
So it's the exact opposite of an insult. Completely. It translates much closer to "dear woman." Jesus wasn't snapping at his mother. It was a gentle response. And if you think about the context of John 19, he uses the exact same word from the cross, while in unimaginable agony, ensuring his mother is taken care of by his disciple.
Right, you don't hurl a casual insult with your dying breaths while trying to secure your mother's future.
Exactly. It makes absolutely zero sense in the narrative context.
But I think I saw something in the notes about a theological layer to this word choice, too.
Yes, there's a deeper layer. The evangelist isn't just recording a conversation. Commentators note that using woman connects back to the beginning of the Hebrew Bible, specifically Genesis 3.15.
Okay, the prophecy about the serpent.
Right. In the Septuagint, which is the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament, the prophecy about the woman whose seed will crush the serpent's head uses the genitive form of that same word, geno. The genitive is the form showing source or possession. So the text is making an intentional theological connection, pointing to Mary as the new Eve who brings forth the Savior. It's a profound theological statement, not a casual insult.
So by using the wrong tool, a modern dictionary instead of ancient linguistic context, Professor Lee accidentally invents a moral controversy out of thin air.
He does.
But if a modern reader can so easily misunderstand a single word because of cultural distance, what happens when they try to read the historical record across thousands of years of archaeological distance?
Well, that moves us from linguistic misunderstanding to historical misunderstanding, because Professor Lee's second major argument is that the Exodus, the epic story of the Israelites fleeing slavery in Egypt, is pure myth.
And his reasoning is that there's no proof, right?
Exactly. He argues there is no extra biblical proof, no massive Egyptian records detailing the event, and therefore archaeology is quote-unquote silent.
Which, on the surface, sounds like a rational scientific conclusion. I mean, if a massive labor force walked out of a country, surely the government wrote it down somewhere.
You would think so. But the essay authors call this a massive logical fallacy. They identify it as argumentum e silentio, an argument from silence.
Right.
The logic assumes that just because we haven't found a specific type of evidence, the event definitively didn't happen. The essay authors reference prominent archaeologists to explain the immense practical reasons for this so-called silence.
Let's get into those reasons, because they make a lot of sense.
First is just geography. The Nile Delta, where the Israelites supposedly lived, is incredibly humid. It is a terrible environment for preserving papyrus or wooden artifacts, unlike the dry desert tombs of Upper Egypt.
That makes sense. Everything just rots away.
Exactly. Second, nomadic people wandering in a desert for 40 years leave almost no permanent archaeological trace. They use tents, not stone.
And third, which is honestly my absolute favorite part of this argument, expecting an ancient Egyptian pharaoh to carve his own humiliating defeat into a giant stone monument is like expecting a modern corporate PR department to issue a celebratory press release about their most embarrassing bankruptcy.
It's just not going to happen.
No. Ancient kings built monuments for propaganda to project divine power, not for objective historical accountability.
They only recorded the wins.
Exactly.
But the essay goes further than just explaining the silence. They argue that archaeology actually isn't silent. We just have to know how to listen to the dirt.
Okay, I like that phrasing.
They bring out specific extra-biblical artifacts that directly counter Professor Lai's claim of zero evidence.
Let's walk through those artifacts, because I really want to know what this evidence actually looks like.
Okay, first, they point to the Brooklyn Papyrus 35.1446. This is a document dating back to the 17th century BC. It's a list of servants and slaves in a household in southern Egypt.
Okay, a slave list.
Right, but what makes it incredible is that it includes distinctively Semitic biblical names like Shipra and Asher.
But does a list of names actually prove anything? Or were there just, a lot of Semitic people in Egypt at the time?
Well, it proves that the cultural conditions described in the text existed exactly when they were supposed to. It puts a Hebrew-speaking labor class in Egypt prior to the Exodus.
Ah, gotcha.
Next is the Merneptah stele from around 1208 BC. A stele is basically a massive stone slab used for royal bragging. Pharaoh Merneptah carved this one to boast about his military victories in Canaan.
And who does he brag about defeating?
He explicitly mentions Israel, and the hieroglyphic determinative used for Israel indicates a recognized, established foreign people group living in Canaan.
Wait, so by 1208 BC, they were already established there?
Exactly. For Israel to be an established people group in Canaan by 1208 BC, they had to have arrived there significantly earlier. That timeline aligns perfectly with a post-Exodus reality.
Wow. And there was also a temple inscription mentioned in the sources that absolutely blew my mind.
Oh, the Soleb Temple of Amenhotep III. That dates to around 1400 BC. This temple contains Egyptian hieroglyphic inscriptions referring to the Shasu of Yu, or the nomads of Yahweh living in the desert region.
Finding the specific sacred name of the Hebrew god Yahweh, inscribed by Egyptians to describe a nomadic group wandering the desert between Egypt and Canaan, right around the time the biblical narrative places them there. I mean, that is a staggering piece of extra-biblical evidence.
It really is. Add to that the Amarna letters.
What are those?
They're cuneiform clay tablets from Canaanite kings. And in these letters, they are practically begging the pharaoh for military help against an invading group they called the Habiru. And many scholars linguistically connect the word Habiru to the Hebrew.
So it's not that there is no evidence, it's that the evidence is scattered and requires synthesis.
Exactly.
You have to piece together the Semitic slave names in Egypt, the nomadic worshippers of Yahweh in the desert, the panic of the Canaanite kings, and the sudden emergence of Israel as a recognized people group.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the essay brings in Kenneth A. Kitchen, a highly eminent British Egyptologist. In his work, Kitchen points out that the Exodus account perfectly matches the unique, granular realities of 2nd millennium BC Egypt.
How granular are we talking?
Very. For example, the text records the price of a slave during the time of Joseph as 20 shekels of silver. Kitchen notes that in the 18th century BC, that was the exact documented going rate for a slave.
Well, wow.
And hundreds of years later, inflation drove that price up to 50 or even 120 shekels.
So a later author making up a myth couldn't possibly have known the accurate slave price from 5 centuries earlier.
Precisely. The types of treaties, the geography, the societal structures, these are details a later forger just couldn't have guessed. The historical text matches the ancient dirt.
Okay, so the archaeology backs up the history.
Mm-hmm.
But none of that matters if the book Professor Lai's reading today has been warped by thousands of years of bad copying, right?
Right.
That's the ultimate skeptic's question.
Yeah.
Is the text we have today actually the same as the original text?
And this is a major pillar of Professor Lai's critique. He argues that because the Old Testament was copied by hand over many centuries, it must have been hopelessly altered, edited, and corrupted. It's the ultimate game of historical telephone.
Yeah, that makes sense if you think about it like a normal book.
Furthermore, he makes an ideological argument that this corrupted text and Christianity as a whole fundamentally threatens traditional Chinese culture.
Let's tackle that telephone game argument first. How do the essay authors prove that a book copied by hand for millennia hasn't completely changed?
They point to perhaps the greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century, which is the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the Qumran caves in 1947.
These were the scrolls hidden in clay jars by a desert sect, right?
Yes. And understand why this matters, you have to look at what we had before 1947. Before the Dead Sea Scrolls, our oldest complete Hebrew Bible manuscript was the Masoretic text, which dated to around 1000 AD. So scholars naturally wondered, how much did the text drift between ancient times and the Middle Ages? But in Qumran, they found the great Isaiah scroll, known as 1 Kiwi sign. and it dates all the way back to roughly 125 BC.
That bridges a gap of over 1,000 years.
1,000 years of hand copying in the dark.
Wow.
And when modern scholars meticulously compared this Isaiah scroll from 125 BC to the Masoretic manuscripts from 1000 AD, they found stunning fidelity. The text was practically identical.
How is that even possible?
Well, it's because ancient Jewish scribal practices were incredibly rigid. They didn't just casually copy words, they counted every single letter on a page. If a copy had even a minor error, it wasn't kept. It was buried or destroyed.
That is intense.
It is. The Dead Sea Scrolls essentially proved that the text had not been corrupted through a loose game of telephone, but had been preserved with extraordinary, almost mechanical accuracy.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because Professor Lee doesn't just attack the reliability of the text, he attacks the cultural impact of the religion itself.
Right.
He claims it's a threat to Chinese culture. That feels like an ideological bias, not an academic observation. How does the essay argue that applying the wrong methodology essentially predetermined his conclusions?
This raises an important question about academic inquiry versus ideological bias. They counter Lee's assertion by looking at how the faith actually interacted with cultures historically. They quote the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 9:22, where he writes, "I have become all things to all people."
Okay.
Historically, the religion didn't just obliterate native cultures, it adapted to them. It synthesized with Greek, Latin, Syriac, and Ethiopian frameworks.
And there's a specific Chinese historical example they used to prove this, right?
Absolutely. The essay brings up the Jingzhou, also known as the Nestorian Christians, who arrived in China during the Tang Dynasty in the 7th century.
What'd it do?
They are a historical proof of concept. The Jingzhou didn't demand the Chinese abandon their philosophical language. They actually used Taoist and Buddhist terminology to translate and explain Christian theology. They integrated deeply and harmoniously with Eastern culture. Oh, that's fascinating.
So the essay suggests that Professor Lee's stated motive to protect traditional Chinese culture from an outside threat reveals that he started his academic research with a predetermined conclusion. And then he used the wrong tools to justify it. This raises an important question about how we approach any piece of history. You just can't start with the answer and work backward.
Exactly. The essay concludes that the Bible, like any ancient text, invites rigorous scrutiny. But it demands that you use the right tools. You cannot use the tools of a modern physicist to do the job of an ancient philologist.
Right.
You need linguistics, you need archaeology, you need historiography.
And above all, you need humility before the original text.
Yeah.
You have to let it speak in its own language in its own time.
Yes, perfectly said.
So what does this all mean? Let's trace the journey we just took. We saw how reading a modern translation without understanding ancient languages creates a fatal mistake, turning a tender Aramaic idiom of respect into a modern insult. We learned how demanding modern standards of evidence from ancient Egyptian pharaohs ignores the realities of the dirt, blinding us to incredible clues like the Merneptah Stellal and the Brooklyn Papyrus.
Oh, true.
And finally, we saw how the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls proved that ancient scribes weren't playing a sloppy game of telephone, but were meticulously preserving their history.
It all comes back to context. Being well-informed isn't just about reading words on a page. It's about understanding the complex ancient world that actually produced those words.
Yeah, when you look at history, you have to consciously check your 21st century lenses at the door, which brings us right back to that telescope. If you try to look at a petri dish through an astrophysics telescope, you're going to think the dish is completely empty. But it's not empty.
You're just looking at it wrong. The tool fundamentally defines the truth you are able to find.
So I want to leave you with a lingering thought to explore on your own. If a brilliant, highly educated physicist can completely misread an ancient text and invent a controversy just by relying on a modern translation, what deeply held beliefs or facts about history are you taking for granted right now, simply because they were filtered to you through a modern linguistic lens? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the mechanics of history. Keep that insane curiosity alive, and we'll catch you next time.